Hi guys, welcome to another one of my videos. Today I'm going to explain to you a little bit about cortisol, or the stress hormone, what it does, how it affects us, and hopefully try to explain to you how to control it as well. So what is stress? Well, I've done a little diagram here as to what stress is and how it's caused. So you've got the central nervous system, which talks to the brain. Now that's an automatic reaction that they respond to each other, so not something that we're in control of. The sympathetic nervous system will go up and operate with the brain. The hypothalamus is located in the brain, so the hypothalamus then talks to your pituitary gland. Pituitary gland then sends a signal down to the adrenal glands. So usually these three will be called the HPA axis. So HPA, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal. So the adrenal glands, they produce different hormones. They produce cortisol, they produce testosterone, they produce adrenaline, but the one that we're going to concentrate on is just the cortisol. So the cortisol is released out into the bloodstream. When that's released out into the bloodstream, that starts to break down sugars. It uses sugars as fuel. Now that's a perfectly normal reaction. What it's doing is getting sugar dumped into the bloodstream to be burnt as a fuel. So a flight and fight response would require some sort of fast energy, and that fast energy would come from your glycogen stores and then convert down into a glucose. Now it can also break down muscle tissue to use that as fuel as well, and it will convert the muscle tissue into glucose and then put that into your bloodstream. Now, if we're in a fight or flight response, so coming from when we were cavemen hunting for food, when we were hunters and gatherers, we would need adrenaline pumped into our bloodstream so that we could then go out hunting and kill something to eat as dinner. The issue is that when we get this now, because we're not hunters and gatherers, we're more producing high levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, and not using it. We're sat at a desk, we're on the phone, and stress is coming around through the telephone conversation, and we don't need all that sugar dumped into our bloodstream. So it does dump into our bloodstream, and then insulin has to come in and control that. It takes all of that sugar over into the liver then converts it into a fat, and we store it as a triglyceride. So as I explained in the previous video, when we produce more triglycerides, the hormone that we need is called HSL, so hormone sensitive lipase. That will help us to break down some of these fatty deposits. But when insulin is high, HSL lowers, so therefore you can't break down the fatty deposits, and therefore you just continually build on your fat cells. So the fat just starts increasing, can never be burned up because our hormone levels are too low. And the hormone levels that are too high are the adrenaline and the cortisol levels. So this is the way that cortisol is produced. Now there are different stages to cortisol. There are different stages to stress. There's a good level of stress, so when you're planning a surprise birthday party, for example, whenever you know there's a reward at the end. So if you're in a high-powered job, that could even be seen as a good level of stress, because there's seen to be something that you're going to achieve at the end of that. If it's just a bad telephone conversation, there's no reward, so you just get stressed, and therefore you need to try and cope with it. Now, what a lot of people use to try and cope with it are different drugs. So they'll use nicotine, so smoking. So offices will introduce regular smoke breaks to try and get your stress levels down so that you can then concentrate better, which is bad because we then become dependent on the drugs. So we become addicted to smoking. Alcohol would be another one. Sweets, so they put vending machines into the offices so that we can then feed ourselves with sweets to lower our stress levels. And all of these things are not helping because we lower our stress levels through them. Also caffeine is another one, so cups of coffee. So we're lowering our stress levels through having these things, but they're not dealing with the problem itself or dealing with how to actually manage stress. All we're doing is using a drug to do that. And the more we use that drug, the more reliant we become on that drug, and the more we end up with a hormone imbalance, meaning that we store more sugars as fat, so we just increase our fat cells. So there's some of the things it does. Now, if those levels are too high, what it will also cause is other problems, not just obesity. Obesity is only one cause of having adrenal dysfunction. We've also got diabetes, LDL cholesterol, estrogen level imbalance, testosterone level imbalance. So if you're pregnant or struggling to get pregnant, it could be down to stress. Obesity could be caused by being too stressed. Diabetes could be caused by being too stressed. High cholesterol could be caused by being too stressed. And also some of the problems linked to giving birth, so actually giving birth in the first place, or it could be other things such as breastfeeding could actually be a big problem to do with stress. So all of these hormones are just fighting against each other when stress is too high. There's different levels to stress. So there's stress where it's planning a surprise birthday party, which is a good level of stress. There's stress where we need to get up first thing in the morning, like a Monday morning, getting up 8 o'clock in the morning. Our stress levels would be very high. That's completely normal and a fine level of stress. The stage higher than that would be a stage where you're getting stressed at work, work's getting on top of you and you can't handle it and there's no real reward at the end of it. So that's a bad level of stress. That's our adrenal glands pumping out too much cortisol and being in a fight or flight response too often. And there's far too much pumping out. So when we go into those modes, we're trying to fight. We're trying to fight with our hormonal balance to get that right. And then a lot of the time we'll end up craving certain foods. So if you're having a real sugar craving, if you're really needing an alcoholic drink or needing a cigarette, these are often reasons why. It's because your adrenal glands are pumping out too much cortisol and you're trying to get them under control. So it's not the right way to control them, but it's why you're craving them in the first place. The stage higher than that we actually call HPA axis dysfunction. So hypothalamus pituitary adrenal gland dysfunction. This is when the hypothalamus produces too many signals to the pituitary gland, which sends too many signals to the adrenal glands, which means that you constantly pump out cortisol, the stress hormone. If this happens, what this means is that you're in a relatively low level of stress, but constantly all day long. You don't have highs, you don't have lows. Now that would be more seen in somebody who's struggling to sleep, somebody who is never really happy, but never really sad either. There's somewhere in the middle, but all day long. Facial expressions like laughing, smiling, they're things that would also be lower. So they wouldn't so much have facial expressions as other people would. They would also suffer with things like cravings, so they would crave more sweets, crave more coffee or caffeine, they would crave more cigarettes, and things like that to try and help them to cope with the levels of stress that are going on. They're the cravings that we get. So this is more sort of the science behind it, and why we get stressed and what stress is and what it does. So it breaks down muscle tissue, it makes us store sugars as fat, and it can stop us from therefore losing weight. So this also explains why some people have very bad diets, and I'm not saying that a bad diet is by any means good or acceptable, but some people who do have a bad diet never seem to get high cholesterol, high blood pressure, diabetes or obesity. They never get them, and you've got to question why they never get them. And one of the answers would be because their hormonal balance is very good. And for their hormonal balance to be good, that means that they've got relatively low levels of stress in their life. Other people would have relatively good diets, now and again have a bad thing. You hear it said all the time where all they have to do is look at a piece of chocolate and they start to gain weight. So basically, as soon as they have something bad, it's being stored as a fat straight away. So that's where it can seem unfair sometimes. Some people seem to store lots of fat, other people seem to store hardly any. And yeah, genetics do play a part in that, but genetics is very broad again. It's a very big subject. So this is one of the things that we can look at, is your adrenal glands being exhausted. What I'll do is in my next video I'll be talking more about how to measure your own level of stress and how to see how stressed you are to be able to see what you need to do then to conquer that. And I'll be giving tips about how to conquer stress and trying to deal with it. Thanks, guys.